Up next, the Bible as blockbuster.
Are you the Messiah?
Another edition of Dateline from my colleague Natalie Morales.
I'm Lester Holt. Thanks for joining us.
Get ready. It's Hollywood's newest extravaganza with a story that's all the rage.
Jesus is the ultimate superhero.
My kingdom is not of this world. It was heartbreaking, but he had to go through it.
The Bible as blockbuster. Tonight, we take you inside one of the biggest trends in entertainment.
People really connect with those characters.
I think it speaks to a deeper need.
And they're the surprising power couple behind it.
We are jokingly referred to as Hollywood's noisiest Christians.
The king of reality TV.
He just has an imagination that nobody else has.
And a former TV angel with a new empire built on faith.
100 million people watch the Bible series. These guys are history makers.
Why do you think you have this calling?
This began as a whisper in our hearts, and it became a roar.
Tonight, the premiere of a whole new chapter and verse.
Do you dare to believe?
This story I don't think has ever been told before.
There's something mysterious, there's something curious.
So powerful and so moving.
Is this the biggest, boldest epic yet?
House of Cards meets Game of Thrones wrapped up in the Bible.
Bible Stories, the new blockbusters.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Natalie Morales. On this Easter Sunday, a look at the divine inspiration that seems to be taking over Hollywood. The good book has always been a good source of material. The biblical epic is as old as Hollywood itself. And the latest, launching tonight here on NBC, is a story you actually may not know. What happened after the death of Jesus? How Christianity spread from one man to 12 apostles to eventually 2 billion people. It's nothing short of a revelation.
It's earth-shaking, a groundswell. The premiere tonight of A.D. The Bible Continues is just the latest in an explosion of religious and biblical programming on television and in the movies.
There's tremendous interest in religion-based programming. Nothing succeeds like success, and so people look at the other successful stories and say, well, they did it, we should do it as well.
And they are. He needs no agent, no limo or private jet, but in many ways, God is the biggest star in Hollywood right now.
I think it's true. God is back.
In the weeks leading up to Easter and Passover, biblical and religious themes have been all over TV. Theologian Candida Moss of the University of Notre Dame.
I think what we're seeing is networks realizing that people want to watch this if it's done right, if it's done in a way that's compelling and engaging.
Just this week, CNN continued Finding Jesus, Faith, Fact, and Forgery, a 6-part series about holy relics, more than tripling its Sunday night audience. PBS carried The Bible's Buried Secrets. National Geographic Channel had its biggest ratings ever with Killing Jesus, based on the Bill O'Reilly Martin Dugard book.
Freedom or death!
CBS aired a 2-part series, The Dove Keepers, about the Jews who held out against armies of Romans in the 1st century.
How will we defeat them?
We fight.
Even the Weather Channel chimed in with Top 10 Bible weather. And the forecast for the future is more of the same. Variety senior critic Scott Foundas.
You could certainly argue that Jesus is the ultimate superhero.
Forbes senior editor Zach O'Malley Greenberg.
How do you kind of get into the superhero boom? And to me, the answer is turn to the public domain. And what better place than the Bible?
There's a history of Hollywood and the Bible. Way back in the silent era, Hollywood mined the Bible for story ideas. Cecil B. DeMille's 1927 epic, The King of Kings, was a big-budget blockbuster, with some sequences even shot in color. In the 50s, DeMille's The Ten Commandments,
Blasphemers!
And a few years later, William Wyler's Ben-Hur were smash hits and Oscar winners.
It was a way for Hollywood to show off what all of its creative departments could do. Biblical movies call for elaborate costumes, big sets, crowd scenes.
I was good, wasn't I?
In the 1990s, network television was also home to religious-based programming. For example, Touched by an Angel, starring Roma Downey and Della Reese. It was a huge hit. Some weeks, more than 20 million viewers watched the show. But over time, by and large, religious themes went out of fashion. That changed in 2004. Mel Gibson, a movie star and Oscar-winning director, wanted to make a film about Jesus called The Passion of the Christ, and even he couldn't get funding.
So he ended up doing it himself as a $30 million independent production. It ended up making more than $600 million at the global box office.
Despite the controversy over its graphic portrayal of the crucifixion and accusations of anti-Semitism, it was a worldwide mega hit.
That was a huge wake-up call that said, maybe the time has come for us to look at biblical subjects again.
Father James Martin is the author of Jesus, A Pilgrimage, and writes about religion and American culture.
It's not that suddenly everyone in Hollywood has become, enamored of Jesus Christ. It's that everyone in Hollywood has always been enamored of money. I mean, let's be honest.
Who we are.
Then, 2 years ago, came one of the most unlikely biblical success stories of all, from one of the most unlikely couples of all. Roma Downey, the star of that big hit Touched by an Angel, and her husband, producer Mark Burnett of Survivor and reality TV fame. Forget about the red carpet. From the green carpet of lawn at their Malibu home, they saw something everyone else had been missing. Roma Downey had an idea born out of belief as much as business. How about making the Bible a mini-series?
There is a saying that God doesn't always call the qualified, but he always qualifies the called. This began as a whisper in our hearts, and it became a roar.
As an alumni of Touched by an Angel, I think, Roma Downey would have had a strong sense of the fact that there is this passionate community out there craving these kind of stories.
Baptize me.
Downey and Burnett thought the idea was an answered prayer.
I think that we have felt a calling on our hearts to do this work. Over a cup of tea, we decided to move forward with this.
Given Hollywood's reluctance to make faith-based shows, they knew it could be a big risk. And despite the couple's huge success in TV, when they pitched their Bible idea, they got about the same response Mel Gibson received.
When you went to the networks and you tried to sell them on it, they thought you two were crazy. What are they saying now?
Yeah, I think in those early days, many people here in Hollywood thought we had lost our minds, that no one would want to see the Bible on TV.
It has begun.
Roma Downey's instinct turned out to be right, and heads turned all over Hollywood.
The ratings for the Bible were off the charts. I don't think very many people expected a religious-based miniseries to get those kinds of ratings.
In total, 100 million viewers watched the 10 episodes on the History Channel. It averaged more than 11 million viewers a week. After the Bible series and the spin-off movie Son of God, Mark Burnett and Roma Downey became the acknowledged king and queen of religious TV programming and films.
I think it speaks to a deeper need that the public have to connect with the Word, to connect with hope, to feel closer to God.
With their newest project, AD The Bible Continues, NBC is doubling down on Bible-based programming.
Blessed are they who have not seen me.
If you'd come to me a couple years ago and said that somebody was going to invest ungodly amounts of money in creating Jerusalem and Morocco and air 1 hour every Sunday for 12 Sundays, I might have said you're out of your mind.
Author and former New York Times TV writer Bill Carter.
I think what NBC was reacting to was the enormous audience for the Bible. I think they looked at this as a pretty good risk with a producer they believed in.
For those who are not believers or do not have faith in their lives, what do they get out of watching this series?
I think AD really is a very dramatic, epic series, dealing with those first couple of decades after the resurrection of Jesus. And so in modern day terms, the politics was such maneuvering. This series is kind of like House of Cards, AD 33, meets Game of Thrones wrapped up in the Bible.
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name.
Burnett is setting the bar pretty high, but they're used to beating the odds, especially considering where they came from. Coming up,
you've said once that perhaps she would have been throwing rocks at you.
Yeah, I might have. I might have been throwing a stone at you.
The angel, the military man.
He was the equivalent of a Navy SEAL, basically.
And a romantic moment right out of the movies.
Oh no, you did it!
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
When Dateline continues. Roma Downey and Mark Burnett have a lot in common. They're both 54, both came to the U.S. looking for the American dream, and both found immense success in Hollywood. But the power couple taking the faith-based community by storm actually began their lives on opposing sides of a deep religious divide. Mark Burnett grew up Protestant in England and served as a paratrooper in the British Army. Roma Downey grew up Catholic in Northern Ireland in the 60s and 70s. It was a time of violence known as the Troubles, and in Northern Ireland, the British military was looked on as an occupying army by many Catholics. And for Downey, it got worse. Her mother died suddenly of a heart attack.
My own mother passed away when I was just a little girl, and that was probably the singularly most traumatic thing that could have happened in my life. It was as if the lights were turned out and she was gone.
You were only 10?
I was 10, yeah. And then I was raised by my dad, a really wonderful father. My dad had a very strong faith.
You never questioned your faith when your mother passed away so young?
No, I was so grateful for the comfort that my faith brought to me.
And Mark, you served in the military in the UK. Had you met her back then when she was a little girl, I think you've said once that perhaps she would have been throwing rocks at you.
Yeah, I might have. I might have been throwing a stone at you. When I was a little girl, all the Catholics lived on one side, all the Protestants lived on another. Never the twain did meet.
A tough childhood, and then when she was 20, her father died. By then, she had decided to become an actress and first came to the U.S. to work on the Broadway stage.
How do you do?
Please vote for my husband.
It wasn't long before she got her big break, playing none other than Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis in the miniseries A Woman Named Jackie.
Love doesn't hide, Christine.
That role eventually led to Touched by an Angel, and her stature as a beloved figure not only with TV audiences, but especially in the faith-based community.
Touched by an Angel was a show that, in addition to, being very popular, it had kind of fanatical fan base. And I'm sure that she encountered that not just in promoting the show, but in just her everyday life.
Mark Burnett had a very different path to success.
He was the equivalent of a Navy SEAL, basically, in England, and came out of that not really knowing what he wanted to do with his life.
Burnett eventually came to Los Angeles to seek his fortune. He sold T-shirts on Venice Beach, sold insurance, and even worked in Malibu as a male nanny, a manny. Squirreling away his money, he worked his way into TV production. He created a show around a competition called Eco Challenge, and later he pitched the American version of a show called Survivor.
The head of CBS thought it was the worst program he'd ever heard of when it first was proposed to him.
Burnett finally got the show on the air when he assured CBS the network wouldn't lose money.
That was part of his original deal with CBS for Survivor. They gave him a very limited budget. I think it was $35,000 a show initially.
To cover his budget shortfall, Burnett had a novel idea. He went to sponsors and got them to pay to place their products in the show.
His success is really a function of two things. One, he was incredibly dogged, amazingly dogged, but also he can sell ice to Eskimos, this guy. I mean, he really is a great salesman and presents himself extremely well.
What do you think it was that allowed you such success?
Listen, I don't know. I'm just doing, and probably to a certain extent, fear is a driver for lots of people. My business driver was the fear of looking back and having not done something significant.
He shouldn't have worried. They both had big hits.
At the same time, we had on CBS Touched by an Angel and Survivor. And by the way, the only show that was beating Survivor was Touched by an Angel.
Professionally, they were successful. In their private lives, not so much. Both had gotten divorced. And then in 2004, maybe it was a tip from heaven, they met in a rather unromantic place, a Los Angeles hair salon.
We met in the Mirror. I was getting my hair cut, and as I left, I just said, "Who's that?" And she said, "It's Roma Downey." I went, "Oh." But then before I called, I was so nervous of the rejection. I called back and asked the receptionist to call Roma and say, "If he calls you, will you go out with him?"
Oh no, you did it.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I know. I like to win. I didn't want to be rejected.
They fell in love. They were married in 2007 by Roma's former co-star of Touched by an Angel, Della Reese, who's an ordained minister. Downey had a daughter. Burnett had 2 sons.
You've blended your families. Has it always been easy, or have there been difficult times as well?
No, we were very fortunate. I think the age of our children when we got together was just great. They were all little. They've all become just the best of friends.
While they were building their life together, Mark Burnett was continuing to build his reality TV empire. Along with Survivor, he also developed Shark Tank, The Voice, and The Apprentice with Donald Trump.
I've known many people over the years that have had great success and they become monsters. Mark has not changed, probably because he believes in God and he knows what we're doing right now. Maybe it's not so important.
And some longtime observers think Roma Downey had a lot to do with that.
I know that Roma Downey influenced him because it's just going to be part of your daily conversation. She's a believer, a deep, deep believer, and I think he's all in.
The so-called father of reality TV, though, as they call you, the dog-eat-dog world of Survivor competitions and The Apprentice, though, do you feel like something in you is changing a little bit more, though, toward more reflective work and more...
No, because Survivor, the very value of Survivor, if you think of it, you can eliminate other people that you're actually working together with. But at the end, it's the very people you eliminated have to grant you the gift of $1 million prize. And so there's big payback. So in the end, being smart and not being ruthless pays off. I mean, some people probably think that the Christian audience is sitting in church all day long. Well, trust me, they watch The Voice, Shark Tank, they go to NFL games, they watch Dateline. It's a normal audience. They just happen
Thank you for the Dateline.
They just happen to know that Jesus is resurrected and he's alive.
Now, in their biggest project ever, they're telling a story rarely told. What happened in the days and years after that first Easter? The story of the movement that changed the world. Coming up, some surprises in the story you think you know.
There are a lot of exciting things that happen, shipwrecked and magical handkerchiefs and prison escapes.
Inside the making of a thoroughly modern Messiah.
We've got Hispanic Jesus, and African Mary Magdalene, African James and Philip. I think we have a little clip to show you, just a 1-minute clip to show you what AD will look like.
For nearly 2 years now,
Roll camera, action!
Roma Downey and Mark Burnett have been engrossed in the biggest project they've ever conceived.
Are you the Messiah? I am.
AD The Bible Continues is a story rarely told. It begins with the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus and follows his disciples through the next 2 decades. It's based on the Acts of the Apostles in the New Testament.
Rise up and walk.
Which is also known as the Book of Acts. Theologian Candida Moss of the University of Notre Dame was an advisor on AD.
It's what happens to the church after Jesus' death. How does it get going? How does it start? How does the missionary process that we call Christianity, how does that begin?
It began with the Apostle Peter, who became the first leader of the church. with Saul, later known as Paul, who at first persecuted Christians, then did a complete 180 and became one, with the Apostle John, and with Mary Magdalene, who was one of Jesus' most devoted followers, and it turns out, mischaracterized over the centuries. Father James Martin.
Mary Magdalene was definitely not a prostitute. Mary Magdalene was the only one that understood the mystery of the resurrection. And so you could say, for a time, for a few hours, Mary Magdalene was the entire church.
That church was at the center of a political and religious storm. The Roman authorities, led by Pontius Pilate,
grant each request. Keeping them at each other's throats prevents them from wrapping their fingers around ours.
And the Jewish high priests, led by Caiaphas, were trying to track down the followers of Jesus. The setting, Jerusalem, in the land of Judea, modern-day Israel.
Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish people. At the same time, it's occupied by the Romans. We have a lot of religious unrest.
Unrest and fear. Terrified, Jesus' followers huddled together in safe houses.
They saw that their leader was crucified and was executed as an enemy of the state, and they were some of his followers, so not surprisingly, they are fearful that the Roman authorities are going to find them as well.
Then, according to the Acts of the Apostles, the Holy Spirit came upon the disciples at Pentecost.
Give us today our daily bread.
And they were inspired to recruit more followers.
Now, spread his word.
They go from this small cluster of dedicated followers to starting this big missionary movement. And they do it through one-to-one contact, through inviting people to meals and telling them about Jesus.
Join us, and you too will receive the Holy Spirit.
Silence them now.
As the Christian movement grew, Jesus' disciples faced dramatic moments.
There are a lot of exciting things that happen, shipwrecked and magical handkerchiefs and things like that, prison escapes.
As AD shows, Christianity began to grow at the same time the Roman Empire was spreading powerfully across the Middle East.
Rome built 2,500 miles of roads in and out of this region for trade and money.
The very roads became the communication system where the message, the word, the gospel was able to spread throughout the world.
By the way, it's the same roads which were like the internet of their day that backfired on Rome.
Downey and Burnett wanted the mini-series to be as close to the scripture as possible, but the book of Acts does not offer a lot of detail.
I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
How do you stay true when there's not a lot of scripture really to guide you in the birth of the church?
Absolutely. This was critical to us. Bringing the book of Acts to the screen brings with it a huge responsibility, and one that we take very seriously. And we've worked with a big board of advisors and scholars and theologians and pastors.
Dozens of experts reviewed the scripts. Cardinal Donald Wuerl of the Catholic Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. was one of them.
I think what they did was to take the scenes that are there and contextualize them.
They're very careful about that, and it's wise because it's potentially a very touchy issue.
Besides getting the story right, Downey and Burnett wanted to get the places, like the key city of Jerusalem, and the people that lived there right too.
Jerusalem was the crossroads of trade from Africa, from the East, from Europe. And so all cultures and races combined within Jerusalem, which was the most economically important place in the world.
For the producers, finding the cast members to fill their Jerusalem was an especially sensitive issue because they learned a big lesson with the Bible miniseries.
We did hear back that from our African-American church friends, the casting was a little white, and we could have done a better job on the casting, and we took that to heart, and we decided, you know, if we get to do this again, which we then got the chance with AD, that we'd make what you see on the screen in the cast reflective of our society at large. And now we've got a Hispanic Jesus, we have an African John the Beloved, African Mary Magdalene, African James and Philip.
I think it's important that people are able to turn their television sets on and see themselves in this story.
I commend them, but I do believe that it could go even further.
Pastor William H. Lamar IV of Metropolitan AME Church in Washington, D.C. supports shows like AD. He also thinks maybe it's time for more African-American filmmakers to tackle biblical stories.
But if I'm serious about it, then I need to get the money and the people to produce something the way that I want it to be seen. I need to go get Ava DuVernay or Spike Lee, and we need to do something ourselves.
Action! Last fall, Burnett and Downey did it their way. With scripts finally ready, the cast and crew headed off on a filmmaking pilgrimage to the Moroccan desert. Coming up, all quiet on the set? Not so much.
You get huge swarms of flies, and all you can hear is and then and with carts.
The cast with some surprising tales from the desert.
There were 3 Marys around, 36 disciples.
We would just kind of bump into each other, the different Jesuses.
As the AD crew began to assemble on location in Morocco, they saw this, cirrus clouds that seemed to form a cross in the sky. Some took it as a sign. Down below, there were more earthly concerns, like building Jerusalem. Roma Downey and Mark Burnett ordered up an entire city from scratch.
We recreated the Temple of Jerusalem and all the streets around Jerusalem circa AD 33. And it took hundreds of workers, months, working almost a 7-day week in the hot Moroccan desert to build this in time.
The conditions were not easy, to say the least. For 6 months, more than 200 cast and crew members were out in the desert, uncomfortable in 100-degree heat during the day and 40-degree chill at night. And while the 12-part series centered on the intercession of the Holy Spirit, there were times they could have simply used some insect repellent.
Action!
The sprawling Jerusalem set was filled with goats, chickens, and donkeys.
And with that combination, you get sort of huge swarms of flies.
Adam Levy played the Apostle Peter, the first leader of the early church. Levy won't forget the distractions while playing this powerful scene with Babou Cissé, who plays John.
And it's incredibly intense, and all you can hear is at the side, and then eventually and with carts, and everybody has to cut because the flies they get to you. By the end of it, you just think, you know, I need to swat them away.
Worse than that, there were the snakes, hundreds of them. Each time the cast was shooting outside, they had to have a special assistant.
And he's very cool as a cucumber, and just picks up the snakes, puts them in his bag, and releases them somewhere safe, away from the crew and the actors.
Chipo Chung plays a pivotal character, Mary Magdalene. The project was serious. The process of making it often was anything but.
We've had the most wonderful and fun and hilarious cast, the company members, and then there's a warmth to Africa.
Not to mention there was a competition of biblical proportions. At the same time AD was shooting, 2 other major religious productions were being filmed nearby, Killing Jesus and Finding Jesus. She says the local hotel became something of a New Testament crossroads.
It's like absolutely bizarre. There were 3 Marys around, 36 disciples, 3 Pilates, 3 Caiaphases.
And of course, 3 Jesuses. In AD, he's portrayed by Juan Pablo Di Paci.
We would just kind of bump into each other, the different Jesuses.
And there were 3 Pontius Pilates around too. Vincent Regan portrays Pilate and interpreted his character as a man in deep conflict about what to do with Jesus.
There's only one small scene between Pilate and Jesus, and it was added. It wasn't originally in the first scripts. I spoke to the guys and I said, guys, you've got Pontius Pilate and Jesus Christ on set. We don't have a scene together. And so they scripted a scene, and we have the scene where Pilate asks Jesus, "What is truth?" Because Pilate is fascinated by Jesus Christ. He is the most enigmatic man Pilate has ever met.
On set, Roma Downey and Mark Burnett encouraged the actors to do what Regan did and come up with a personal interpretation of their roles. Chipo Chung was moved by the opportunity to play Mary Magdalene.
At the most terrifying time for Jesus and his followers, there was one person who truly believed and then who was a witness, and it was a woman.
Few actors get a chance to play such important biblical characters. Even fewer get to play perhaps the most sacred role of all. Coming up, Jesus on the cross.
I just remember looking around and just getting that weird vision of what he must have looked at. That was so powerful and so moving.
Hundreds of actors and crew were in the hot Moroccan desert, dramatizing the birth and early days of Christianity. The story begins with the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. For Juan Pablo de Pachi, the role was a serious and sacred responsibility. Before shooting the crucifixion scene, he left the rest of the cast and took off on his own.
I did voluntarily because I felt like I had to, so I went to the desert on my own. I slept under the stars for 3 nights before going to shoot. I just kind of decided I need to find this place where I can just center myself.
1 second, 1 second, that's it.
You're hanging from a harness.
For de Pachi, the crucifixion scene was emotional, painful, and somehow wonderful.
The sun is baking, but I just remember looking around and just getting that weird vision of what he must have looked at from that point of view, and that was so powerful and so moving. I would do it over and over and over and over again because it was just a beautiful thing to be given that honor to have that point of view. The moment where he looks up at the sky and he has this moment with his father. The clouds gathered above were so stunning that it was literally like I was talking to my father.
Roma Downey was often on set to lend emotional support. But even before filming was done,
It's your salvation.
She and her husband turned from producers to evangelists, spreading the word of their new project to the faithful. It didn't just involve premieres and interviews. They did something largely unheard of. They brought AD to fans gathered at mega churches all over America, to Texas, to Oklahoma,
Mark Burnett and Roma Downey are heroes to us.
And California.
What's really gratifying is to feel and see the exhibition of support. We are making it easier for people of faith to stand up and be noisier. And we are jokingly referred to as Hollywood's noisiest Christians. And hey, we own that.
Nobody has ever been smarter, in my experience at marketing and television, than Mark Burnett. He's a fantastic, strategic marketing person.
They're amazing people.
At Lakewood Church in Houston, with a weekly attendance of more than 40,000, best-selling author Pastor Joel Osteen praised their work while millions more watched on TV.
100 million people watched the Bible series, the Son of God movie. These guys are history makers, world changers. They're friends of ours, friends of the ministry.
Downey and Burnett were quick to see that megachurches were powerful markets for their message.
Megachurches are a response to people's desire for not only God, but community. And they provide a lot of things that traditional and more mainstream churches do not, which is the sense of welcome, a sense of joy.
And they're super sophisticated. For instance, LifeChurch.tv in Oklahoma City has this state-of-the-art global operations center. It tracks its 22 campuses across the country and tallies downloads of its Bible app, now well over 170 million worldwide.
You know, one thing we're very aware of is that just being Christian doesn't give you the right to make crappy content.
At several churches, Downey and Burnett held a series of screenings of AD, The Bible Continues.
Their audience is not necessarily the audience that's going to respond to a full-page ad in the New York Times or a big billboard on Sunset Boulevard. The word is going out in a kind of word-of-mouth, grassroots fashion. It's been hugely successful.
In Southern California, they were at Saddleback Church, home of the best-selling author, Pastor Rick Warren.
This series is 12 hours, 12 weeks in a row. It's like a commercial for get your butt back in church.
Pastor Warren says he'd recommend any of Downey and Burnett's work, including AD.
The stories are powerful. We don't need to interpret and say, this means this. You don't need to teach. You don't need to preach. You just let the story speak for itself.
It's very, very important for the congregations to see that we're not sitting back in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, and sending out our faith work, but we're showing up in person to meet people.
But Burnett and Downey are well aware that not all religion-based TV shows and films are a guaranteed success. Their own miniseries, The Dove Keepers, was something less than a smash on CBS last week. Two major film releases last year, Exodus and Noah, faced criticism and lack of support from some church groups who disapproved of the way they told the Bible story.
Noah and Exodus, even though they're perfectly on point in at least their titles, but there's something really important about not changing the text.
What is truth?
They've invested 2 years and millions of dollars in AD. Now Burnett and Downey are waiting to see if the big risk will pay off. Coming up, from one audience to another, the Francis factor.
I know people who say they love this guy.
An emotional meeting with Pope Francis that didn't quite go as planned.
I made a tremendously big faux pas.
And the Pope just smiled and said, hey.
When Dateline continues. Roma Downey and Mark Burnett are about to see if their huge investment in AD, The Bible Continues, pays dividends. Some observers say the couple and NBC have taken a risk with the project.
If there's a risk, it is that it's a slightly less known commodity than the narrative of Jesus, which everybody knows.
You know, you always take a risk in dramatic programming when you don't have your big star. And in this case, your big star has left the scene, the Acts of the Apostles. Jesus has moved on.
Good morning, Metropolitan.
But some pastors believe AD and the other religious programs might prod some in the audience to learn more.
People in this nation don't have the biblical literacy that they once had, so there is an opportunity to give the stories new life and to tell the story to a 21st century audience.
Some think part of the reason for the boom in religious programming this season might be called the Francis effect. Pope Francis has stirred interest in religion and the Catholic Church worldwide.
Pope Francis's effect on the church and the world is inestimable. I know people who say that I'm Jewish or Muslim or Protestant or atheist and say I love this guy.
Recently, Downey and Burnett had a private meeting with the Pope, set up by their friend, Cardinal Donald Wuerl, Archbishop of Washington, D.C.
That was a very happy moment to be able to present them to Pope Francis. I think they were, as one would expect, as they should have been, somewhat moved by this.
Oh, he is the Pope of Hope. It was just an incredible experience. He's an extraordinary human being, and I was really overwhelmed with emotion.
But there was a bit of a glitch captured in this framed photo in their living room.
When we showed up, Roma had a white coats on. And everybody else there looked like, what is this lady wearing? Because apparently there's some rule. The one thing you don't wear when you go to see the Pope is white. And the Pope just smiled and said, hey.
I didn't know. Apparently I made a tremendously big fashion faux pas. If I ever get the chance to go again, I won't wear ivory. I promise.
The Nazarene's men tore open the tomb and stole his corpse.
As AD is set to premiere,
It is the third day.
producers Downey and Burnett are already on to their next big project. They're doing a feature film remake of this 1959 classic, Ben-Hur.
It's action-packed, and there's a whole new generation that don't know this story. When we told our kids we were making Ben-Hur, they said, Ben who?
As for the couple's personal religious beliefs, Downey is a devout Roman Catholic, and Burnett describes himself simply as Christian. They say their denomination isn't important, it's their shared love of God. And on this Easter Sunday, they're reflecting on their faith.
Do you both believe what happens in the afterlife? Do you believe in going to a heaven?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I'm so comforted and I'm given such hope by believing in heaven. And I believe with all my heart that I will be reunited in some form with my beloved mother and my dad.
Mark, were you always such a strong person of faith as well? Or did Roma help deepen that faith somehow?
Yes, Roma helped deepen it. Working for the last 5 years every day has helped deepen it.
We pick up the Bible throughout the day to read the Word, to be close to the Word, and of course we go to church on Sundays, but...
Also, reading the Bible every day is part of our job.
They also see charity as part of their job. Recently, the couple donated more than $1 million to the Cradle Fund, which is helping Iraqi and Syrian refugees terrorized and displaced by ISIS. This Easter, the humanitarian crisis in the region is a huge concern.
You both are so involved with your foundation.